What if the moment that looked like America losing control was actually the moment everything went exactly according to plan? 3 hours. That's all it took. 3 hours after Donald Trump told the world he calls the shots in the Middle East, Israel launched a wave of fighter jets deep into Iranian territory. And the White House said absolutely nothing. No denial, no confirmation, not a single word. And in that silence, something important happened. Not what the media told you happened, but something far more calculated, far more deliberate, and far more revealing about who is really running this war. If that question is already pulling at you, do yourself a favor right now. Hit like on this video, subscribe to this channel, and if you have a friend who still believes everything they see on the evening news, share this with them. Because what we're about to unpack together is something most newsrooms are deliberately avoiding. Let's go back to June 8th, 2026. Donald Trump sat down with the Financial Times and said something that would define the next 48 hours. He said, "Netanyahu will have no choice. I call the shots. He is not the decision maker." Those words landed like a hammer, strong, confident, absolute. The image was clear. The most powerful man on earth, fully in command, telling his regional partner to stand down. 3 hours later, Israel struck. Dozens of jets, deep into Iranian airspace, military facilities, petrochemical plants, the kind of strike that doesn't happen by accident. And the White House? Total silence. Not a press briefing. Not an anonymous leak to calm things down. Nothing. Every major media outlet on the planet ran the same story within hours. Trump humiliated. Netanyahu defied America. Israel is out of control. Senator Chris Murphy jumped on social media and wrote that this war had become humiliating for Trump and for American power generally. He said that when a president announces he's going to stop a retaliation and the retaliation happens anyway, the humiliation just keeps compounding. And that story felt satisfying. It has a clean, dramatic shape to it. The small country outsmarts the superpower. The underdog ignores the bully. Great story, very watchable, very shareable, and almost certainly not the full picture. Today, I'm going to walk you through 3 different frameworks for understanding what actually happened. Not to tell you what to think, but to show you how the same set of facts can tell very different stories depending on which questions you ask. Most people are only being given one story. I want to give you all 3. Let's call the first one the classic version. The one CNN, the BBC, and most Western outlets are running with. The idea is simple. Sometimes the smaller actor ends up controlling the larger one. The dog wags the tail, but sometimes the tail starts wagging the dog. In this case, the theory says Israel is the tail, America is the dog. And Netanyahu has been pulling Washington into a conflict that the United States didn't fully sign up for. And to be fair, this theory has real evidence behind it. Trump didn't just casually suggest Netanyahu hold off. He called him directly. Multiple sources confirmed it. American officials said Trump genuinely believed he had convinced Netanyahu to pause. He was so confident that he said it publicly, on the record, to a major financial newspaper before the attack happened. That's not a bluff. That's a man who thought he had the situation handled. And it gets more personal than that. The week before, Trump had a phone call with Netanyahu that, by Trump's own admission, did not go well. Trump told reporters he had actually cursed at Netanyahu. The President of the United States was so frustrated that he was swearing at the Israeli Prime Minister over the phone. That is not the body language of someone who is secretly coordinating with his partner behind the scenes. On top of that, Netanyahu had serious domestic pressure. His main political rival, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, publicly stated that if Netanyahu listened to Trump and held back, it would prove that Israel was no longer a sovereign state. Think about what that means heading into what's expected to be a brutal election. Netanyahu could not afford to look like he takes orders from Washington. He needed to look strong, independent, and decisive. So the logic is real. Netanyahu had reasons to defy Trump. He had done it before. And the surface facts, Trump said stop, Netanyahu didn't stop, seemed to confirm everything. Strong argument, clean logic, good evidence, and that is exactly why you have to push past it. Because here is the one question that completely unravels Theory 1. If America genuinely wanted to stop Israel, why didn't it use any of its actual leverage? Think about this carefully. America provides Israel with nearly its entire advanced weapons arsenal: bunker buster bombs, cruise missiles, precision targeting systems. America runs the air defense network that protects Israeli skies, the Aegis destroyers positioned in the eastern Mediterranean, the early warning sensors, the mid-course tracking data. America shares the intelligence that Israel uses to plan every single one of these strike packages. All America had to do was pull back one of those things. Just one, and Israel could not have operated the way it did on June 8th. But America pulled back nothing. It continued to provide full military and intelligence cover for Israel. Even in the hours immediately after the supposed humiliation, even after Netanyahu had allegedly embarrassed the President of the United States in front of the entire world. You don't keep protecting someone who just embarrassed you unless you weren't actually embarrassed, unless the embarrassment was part of the plan. That brings us to Theory 2, and this one is where the picture starts to change significantly. Theory 2 says America is not being manipulated by Israel. America is actively using Israel as a forward instrument, a regional tool to accomplish strategic goals that Washington cannot or will not pursue directly. When American and Israeli interests align perfectly, the United States doesn't need to stop Israel. It just steps to the side and lets things happen. The public theater of Trump saying, "Don't do it," while Netanyahu does it anyway, gives America the cover it needs. America gets to look like the responsible adult in the room while the military objectives get achieved anyway. And this isn't just a fringe theory. It's being argued by serious organizations with real track records. The Democracy for the Arab World Now organization, a Washington-based nonprofit, concluded that American policy has effectively turned Israel into what they described as a regional proxy force. They argued that the actions carried out by Israel in the region are practically indistinguishable from American policy objectives because Israel is executing American strategic goals. The key difference: no American soldiers are dying in the process. A Palestinian policy network called Al-Shabaka, drawing on international scholars, went further. They described the current conflict not as a spontaneous war or even as a product of Israeli manipulation of Washington, but as a deliberate joint strategy between the United States and Israel, designed to eliminate resistance movements and fundamentally reshape the entire Middle Eastern power structure in their shared interest. Now here is where I need you to slow down, because this next source is not from an advocacy group. It's not from a foreign government. It is from one of the most senior Republican voices in the United States Senate. Senator Lindsey Graham said publicly on the record, with what can only be described as enthusiasm, that controlling 31% of the world's oil reserves from Iran and Venezuela would be a massively profitable strategic investment. And then he called that outcome, and I want you to really hear this, he called it China's nightmare. An American senator told the world openly that the real goal of this conflict is not stopping nuclear weapons. It is not democracy promotion. It is not human rights. The real goal is to control nearly a third of the world's oil supply and to use that control to economically strangle China. He said the quiet part out loud. And the remarkable thing is how little mainstream coverage that quote received. A Middle East analysis publication called The Electronic Intifada made a point that I think is the most strategically significant of all. Iran is not just a country with a nuclear ambition. Iran is Russia's key regional partner. Iran is one of China's most important energy suppliers. Iran sits at a critical node in the supply chains that both Beijing and Moscow depend on. If Iran is broken, both Russia and China simultaneously lose a strategic ally, an energy source, and a foothold of regional influence. That is what Graham meant by China's nightmare, because that is precisely what this was designed to create. Medical International, a German human rights and international health organization, offered perhaps the bluntest assessment. After Gaza, after Hezbollah was degraded in Lebanon, after the Assad government fell in Syria, this is the moment, they wrote, that the United States and Israel are using to reshape the entire Middle East in their favor. This is not part 1, this is part 5 of a long-term plan, and Israel is the primary instrument of execution. When you line up those 5 independent sources, a Washington nonprofit, an international policy network, a senior US senator, a geopolitical analysis outlet, and a German human rights organization, they're all pointing at the same thing. The story is not Netanyahu tricked Trump. The story is that when both parties share the same strategic destination, the larger party doesn't need to steer. It just lets the smaller one drive. Now let me give you the specific timeline of June 7th, because one day, 3 events happened, and no major news network has connected all 3 of them. Event 1. That morning, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to seize and redirect between $12 and $24 billion in frozen Iranian assets. This money was then designated as compensation for Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. Why does this matter beyond the dollar amount? Because for weeks, through a Pakistani mediation channel, Iran had one non-negotiable condition for any peace negotiation. 1. Release the frozen assets and we will talk. Release the frozen assets and we will consider reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Release the frozen assets and there is a path to a ceasefire. That was the only door that led anywhere close to a diplomatic resolution. On the morning of June 7th, the United States did not just refuse to open that door. They seized the money, transferred it to Iran's regional rivals, and handed the key to Riyadh. Iran's deputy foreign minister responded immediately and stated that Iranian assets are not war spoils to be distributed. Iran froze the diplomatic channel on the spot. Now, notice the timing. On the same morning that America economically closed the only path to negotiation, the Financial Times published Trump's interview in which he said he was very close to a deal with Iran. On the same day you destroy the foundation of any possible agreement, you tell the world the agreement is almost done. That is not a contradiction. That is a performance. Event 2. That same afternoon, Israel bombed the Dahieh neighborhood in the southern suburbs of Beirut. 2 people killed, 11 wounded, but here is the detail that changes everything. 5 days before this attack, exactly 5 days, Iran's Qatam al-Anbiya Central War Command issued a public warning in 3 languages: Hebrew, Farsi, and Arabic. The warning stated clearly, any Israeli strike on Dahieh will immediately trigger Operation True Promise 5, 3 languages, 5 days of advance notice, broadcast as widely as possible. Iran could not have been more transparent about where their red line was. Israel crossed it anyway. Event 3, Saudi television channel Al Hadath reported that Israel had coordinated the Beirut strike with the United States in advance. American officials did not confirm this. They also did not deny it. In diplomatic language, a deliberate non-denial is not carelessness. It is a message. If that report were false, the White House would have issued an immediate denial, standard procedure. They stayed silent. So on June 7th alone, America seized Iranian assets and closed the economic door. Israel bombed Dahieh and crossed a publicly declared red line. And evidence of prior American-Israeli coordination sat quietly, undenied, in the open. 3 separate events, 1 coordinated plan. Now here is the dimension that almost nobody is discussing, and this one reshapes everything we've covered so far. Why did Iran retaliate so fast? Israel struck Beirut on the afternoon of June 7th. Within hours, not days, not a week, hours, the IRGC had already launched waves of ballistic missiles at the Ramat David Air Base in northern Israel. Under normal circumstances, a decision of that magnitude requires a cabinet meeting, consultation with the supreme leader, diplomatic calculation, operational planning. In any country in the world, that process takes days at minimum. Iran did it in hours. Why? The answer is a military doctrine called mosaic defense. Iran does not operate through a single centralized command structure for strike decisions. Instead, it has 31 provincial IRGC commands, each holding what military strategists call pre-delegated authority. This means each regional command is authorized in advance to independently initiate a strike when a specific predetermined condition is confirmed. No phone call to Tehran, no authorization request, no deliberation. Think of it this way. Imagine 31 soldiers standing watch at 31 different positions. Their general already told them, if this specific alarm triggers, don't call me, don't ask, just fire. That is mosaic defense. What made True Promise 5 different from the 4 operations that came before it was this. For the first time in Iranian military history, the operation was pre-announced as a conditional trigger. The Qatam command published the exact tripwire 5 days early in 3 languages for every intelligence agency on the planet to read. This meant that when the provincial IRGC commands received confirmation that Dahieh had been hit, they did not call anyone in Tehran. The confirmation of the trigger event was itself the standing order. They fired automatically. Now sit with the implication of that for a moment. If Iran's retaliation was automatic, and everyone knew it would be automatic because Iran had published the trigger condition 5 days in advance in 3 languages, then the United States and Israel knew exactly what would follow the moment they authorized the Beirut strike. They knew Iran would fire. They knew Israel would then have a justification to escalate directly into Iranian territory. And they knew that in real time, while Iranian missiles were in the air, American Aegis destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean would be feeding live tracking data to Israel's Arrow 3 and David Sling defense systems, both sides collecting real wartime performance data from an actual live engagement, with Iran as the test subject, and Iran had no idea that was the function they were serving when they pulled the trigger. Here is why that matters even more than it first appears. Trump told NBC News on June 7th that Iran's military had been, in his words, totally destroyed. He said Iran retained only about 21 or 22% of its pre-war missile stockpile, but classified American intelligence assessments put Iran's actual remaining capability at around 70%, not 21, 70. So either Trump genuinely did not know the real number, or he knew and chose to present a different one to the public. Either way, when Iran launched more than 10 ballistic missiles in 3 separate waves at Ramat David, every system tracking those missiles was delivering live data about what Iran actually has left. The gap between what Trump said publicly and what American intelligence actually knew was being closed in real time by Iran's own retaliation. That is not chaos. That is reconnaissance. And Iran funded it with its own missiles. Now let me bring Theory 3 together, because this is where all of the threads converge into a single picture. In game theory, when 2 actors share the same strategic goal but need to present different faces to different audiences, they will stage a visible disagreement while coordinating privately. Each plays a role. Each collects the political benefit of that role. And underneath the performance, the real work continues uninterrupted. Consider what each side needed from this situation. Trump needed a specific image. He needed to look like the peacemaker, the man who tried to stop the war, the responsible adult who called Netanyahu and said, "Hold on." He needed that image for American voters exhausted by military entanglement. He needed it for Wall Street investors watching oil prices spike. He needed it for NATO allies looking for signs of American restraint and leadership. The only way Trump could maintain that image was to be seen resisting Netanyahu, and then be seen being defied. The defiance was the performance. The peace effort was the costume. Netanyahu needed the exact opposite image. He needed to look like the sovereign commander, the leader who answers to no foreign capital, the man who makes decisions based on Israeli security alone, regardless of what Washington says or wants. He needed that image for Israeli voters heading into a brutally competitive election, and he needed it to shut down Naftali Bennett, who who was publicly saying that if Netanyahu followed Trump's wishes, Israel would no longer be a real sovereign state. So when Trump publicly says, "I call the shots," and Netanyahu strikes anyway, what actually happened is this. Trump got footage for the American media showing his peace effort. Netanyahu got footage for the Israeli media showing his independence. The strike happened, and both leaders got precisely what their domestic audiences needed to see. The theater served both rooms at the same time. And underneath that theater, American Aegis destroyers were tracking Iranian missiles. American intelligence was still flowing into Israeli strike planning. American naval assets were enforcing the economic pressure that kept Iran's leverage neutralized. The disagreement was the show. The coordination was the substance. You've been watching this whole video, and if you've made it this far, you clearly care about understanding what's actually happening in the world, not just the version that's easy to package in a headline. That means a lot. So before we hit the final piece of this, take 2 seconds. Share this video with one person who you think deserves a better analysis than what the nightly news is offering. It costs nothing and it means everything to this channel. Now let me give you 3 specific things to watch for in the coming days, because any serious framework needs to make testable predictions. Here is how you evaluate this in real time. First, watch the IRGC statements, not the American commentary about them, the statements themselves. The IRGC described Operation True Promise 5 as a warning shot with a clear conditional structure. If Israel stops striking Lebanese territory, particularly Dahiyeh, the chain stops. If Israel continues, the mosaic defense structure automatically triggers the next sequence. No deliberation needed in Tehran. No authorization from the Supreme Leader's office required. So watch whether Israel actually slows its operations in Lebanon. That single indicator tells you more about whether Washington wants de-escalation than any press briefing ever will. Second, watch what the White House does not say. If America was genuinely humiliated by Netanyahu's defiance, they would issue a formal, explicit, on-the-record statement from the State Department or the National Security Council clearly stating that they had no advance knowledge of the Beirut strike and no coordination with Israel on the June 8th attack on Iran. Not an anonymous leak, not a social media post, a formal denial on the record with named officials. If that statement does not appear, you have your answer. Governments deny what they need to deny. Silence is not confusion. Silence is consent. Third, watch the oil markets and the bond markets together. Senator Graham already told you the end game. 31% of global oil reserves, and creating what he called China's nightmare. If Iran is pushed into a position where it can no longer credibly threaten the Strait of Hormuz, where it can no longer use energy disruption as a bargaining chip, watch who actually benefits. Not Israel, not Saudi Arabia. The primary beneficiary is the architecture of the petrodollar system. The beneficiary is the flow of capital back into American Treasury bonds. The beneficiary is Washington's ability to continue financing its debt at favorable rates while its strategic rivals lose critical energy access. Follow the money. It is always the most honest map of what any conflict is actually about. Now step back and look at everything we've covered today as one picture. On the morning of June 7th, $12 to $24 billion in Iranian frozen assets were seized, closing the only economic door that existed for any diplomatic resolution. That same afternoon, Israel struck Dahiyeh, crossing a red line that Iran had announced publicly in 3 languages, 5 days in advance. Within hours, 31 IRGC provincial commands fired automatically, exactly as the published doctrine said they would, exactly as everyone who read that 5-day warning would have expected. More than 10 ballistic missiles struck Ramat David in 3 waves, feeding real-time performance data into the joint American-Israeli air defense network. The White House stayed completely silent, never once denying prior coordination with Israel. America continued providing full naval and air defense support to Israel immediately after the supposed humiliation. And Senator Lindsey Graham told the world, openly and with pride, that the real goal of all of this is to control nearly 1/3 of global oil reserves and make that control China's nightmare. When you place all of those facts side by side, not in isolation, but together, one question becomes impossible to avoid. If Netanyahu was genuinely defying Trump, why did every single American action on June 7th and 8th serve Washington's long-term strategic interests with perfect precision? Seizing Iranian assets served American interests. Triggering Iran's automatic retaliation served American interests by generating justification for further escalation. Israel degrading Iranian petrochemical infrastructure served American interests by weakening Iranian economic capacity. Collecting live Iranian missile data served American interests for whatever comes next. None of this is the result of chaos. None of it is the result of one man ignoring another man's phone call. This is the result of coordination wearing the costume of conflict. The Lindsey Graham quote, "China's nightmare, 31% of world oil." That is not political bluster. That is the footnote Washington accidentally left visible. The real goal is not Iran's nuclear program. It is not Israeli security alone. It is not the Lebanese civilians caught between these forces. The real goal is to control the energy architecture of the Middle East, to sever the supply lines that Russia and China depend on, and to accomplish all of that using Israel as the forward instrument, while maintaining enough visible disagreement to give both leaders the domestic image they need. That is what this looks like when you stop asking who is winning the argument and start asking who benefits from everyone believing there is one. I want to leave you with a homework assignment, and I mean this. Actually do it. Find the original statement from the Khatam al-Anbiya command about True Promise 5, issued on June 1st and 2nd. Then find the reporting on Scott Bessent invoking emergency economic powers on June 7th. Put those two documents side by side, look at the timestamps, and then ask yourself honestly whether the convergence of those two events on the same day can be explained by coincidence. If you find something that contradicts what I've said today, come argue with me in the comments. I genuinely want that challenge. The only way any of us moves closer to the truth is through honest disagreement backed by better evidence. I am not asking you to accept my framework. I'm asking you to look at the same data and ask different questions. The mainstream question is, who is controlling whom, Israel or America? The better question is, why do both sides need the world to believe they're in conflict? And who benefits when we do? Sit with that long enough and look at what we covered today. The asset seizure timing, the Mosaic defense tripwire, the Graham oil quote, the White House silence, the live missile data collection. And you will start to see something the nightly news is simply not built to show you. The most sophisticated operations don't look like operations. They look like chaos. They look like disagreement. They look like one man defying another. And while the cameras are pointed at the argument, the strategy moves forward exactly as designed.